through how to develop in the develop module in Lightroom. So first of all, I'm here in the library. I'm in my grid mode here, and I'm going to pick the image that I want to develop. I'm going to walk you through a couple different things. So I will, maybe I'll start with this image, and I'm going to say develop up at the top. And what you'll see here is that on the left-hand side, you've got a bunch of sort of access points for your image. You can see the whole history of what you've done. You can see what collections you have and what images are in them. You can make snapshots, which means that you can make multiple variations of the same image. And your presets, we're not going to use those. Those are like filters. But on this side, you've got kind of all of the different stuff that you need to make your images really good. Let's keep in mind that you're starting with a raw file, and a raw file is quite literally just a negative. It comes out of the camera and it's ready to be manipulated and worked on to make it really good. So whatever comes out of the camera is just a starting point for you. You really should be working your way through this entire process. So very first thing I'm going to do on any image that I have is I'm going to scroll down here and I'm going to go to my lens corrections. So when I do corrections and editing on my images, I want to work from the most global tools to the most local tools. And the reason for that is obviously because you want to affect the whole image before you start affecting smaller pieces of it. You want to do things that are more automated before you do things that are more specific. So very first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to click this remove chromatic aberration button. Chromatic aberration, well, hold on, I'll show you what it is. So when you get up close to the edges, turn this off. When you get up close to the edges of things, you might see, like right here, this purple that's coming down. This happens where there's like high contrast edges, usually towards the edges of your frame. If you enable remove chromatic aberration here, what you're trying to do is get rid of that purple or sometimes green along the edges. Now, that did a little bit, but it didn't get rid of the whole thing, so I'm going to go into manual here, and I'm going to remove that purple. So I'm just scooting this just a little bit until that purple is gone. You can adjust your hue, like if it's a different color of purple, you can move these so it's looking at a different color range. And you also will be able to remove green, which often is a chromatic aberration issue. So you notice I'm looking at this at 300%. It's hard to see this when you're looking at it from far away. So you can use this navigator to go into 100% or set it at 3, 4, 8. You know, I like 300%. That's about a good place to look at your image from for chromatic aberration. First thing. Second thing I'm going to do is go back to the profile for lens corrections, and I'm going to enable profile corrections. And if you just watch the image as I click on this, you'll see that it makes some general adjustments. So every camera manufacturer and lens has a specific things that are innate in those cameras. You know, the bend of the lens, the color shifting. And so each company sort of provides the sort of autocorrect for those things. So in this case, you know, it flattens and it brightens a little bit. So just have to do that. If it doesn't show up, you can actually choose your lens and your camera, and it will make that profile for you. So I'm done with lens corrections. So the second thing I'm going to do after I do that, I'm going to go to a different image to show you this, but I'm going to go to this image here and show you my next step would be to crop and straighten anything that I want to crop and straighten. And so you have two different ways to do this. The first way is in this crop overlay tool here. So you'll see that one, you have the ability to actually crop your image. So you can move this in and out. If you notice, the image, the sides of this moved at the same rate, the same aspect ratio. That's because this lock is locked over here. If I unlock that, it'll allow me to move this crop box all over the place. I don't want that. I want my image to be the same aspect ratio of how it came out the camera. So I'm going to lock that and make sure that as I crop, I'm cropping to that aspect ratio. Be gentle with your cropping. When you crop your images, you are getting rid of pixels. I would much prefer that you do your cropping in your camera as much as humanly possible. So here I'm just going to press return and that'll crop my image there. But also you'll notice that this image is real crooked. So I want to straighten this. There's two ways that I can do this here. I've got this angle tool that I can pull from, you have to like go pick it up and take it. And for the angle tool, I love this tool. It's very easy. You're going to mouse down and follow whatever line in your image you want to be straight. So I'm following the edge of the grass here on the side of the road, and I go right along that line, and when I let go, it straightens that line. And I can press return, and now I have a straight line in the background here. My second option, I'm going to Command Z that. My second option here is to use this slider. This I find to be a little bit harder to manage, but you do get a grid and you can slide it and just straighten based on eye. So those are two different ways that you can use this particular tool to straighten things. You also have something down here that is your transform tool. And your transform tool, I'm going to show you the transform tool maybe based on this particular image here. So with your transform tool, you're able to straighten all kinds of different lines. So if I use my auto right here for this image, oh, it's funny, this image is pretty straight to begin with, but I go auto and it's straightening all the lines. I can turn that off and I can just level, so it'll look at just the horizontal lines and it'll just level based on your horizontal lines. Vertical will just look at your vertical lines and straighten based on your vertical lines. Full will be looking at the entire image and trying to make all the lines straight. But what I do like about this tool is that you have this thing right here, which allows you to actually create your own lines that you want straight. So say I want this line to make sure that line's straight. I want to make sure this line across the top here is straight. I want to make sure that the side of the window here is straight. And I want to make sure this bottom line here is straight. Now I've got 4 lines, and each of those lines is nice and straight. I can put that back, and I've got a really nice image. This is great for architectural images in particular, where you don't just have one line that you need to straighten out. So that's straightening. That comes sort of second in line. Third thing you're going to do after you straighten your image is you're going to white balance. And what white balance is, it means that you're taking any like color casting off of your image and trying to make sure that you have fidelity of color and that the light looks like the color of light that you were photographing in. So I'm going to use a different image here to give you an example of this. So this image, if you look at this, you can see that it's very, very like cyan and kind of green. That is a white wall, and that back wall is like a yellow, and it just looks really muddy because the color casting on this image is pretty bad. So what I'm going to do to fix this is I'm going to take this white balance tool right here, this eyedropper. I just picked it up here under your basic panel, and I'm going to look, if you see this, there's a target over your image. So I can see what the red, green, and blue values are for each of the pixels in this area, in this target area. A neutral tone, so having no color casting, would be that the red, green, and blue values would each be equal. What I can see here is that I've got much higher red and green values than I do blue values. But I do know that this should be a neutral area. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click right down on something that I think should be sort of a neutral gray area, and it's going to make all of those values equal. So if I pick this back up and I go right to where I clicked, I've now got my red value at 60, my green value at 60, and my blue value at 60. So it took all of the color casting out of that image, and now all of the colors feel much more realistic and good, like there's richness to them. Now, this eyedropper is not going to work for all your images. You're not always going to have an easy location in them that feels like it's the right color balance. So I will show you, let's look at this image again and what I would do in this case. So you have two other kinds of options for how you could go about getting the white balance correct. So in this case, I'm not going to use the eyedropper. I'm going to use this drop-down menu. And so I'm going to check these different possibilities that are auto sort of possibilities for my white balance here. And I'm moving through them, and I'm trying to see if any of them get me close to what I think is good. So definitely not that one. Or that one. Those feel really blue. So I'm going to go back up to maybe daylight. That feels pretty good. And from there, I'm gonna just adjust my sliders. So your temperature slider will go from blue to yellow. So if you're feeling like it's a really warm image and it needs to be cooler, you can go towards the blue. So you see that now I'm cooling off this image here. And if you feel like it needs more warmth, you go towards the yellow, and you can see that warmth come back in. The tint and slider, this is going to go, like if you have green or magenta, these are going to show you what it looks like if you add more green to the image, or in this case, more magenta to the image. Now, I want to take all of that out. I want to find the balance between the green and magenta and sort of leave it right there. So now I've got a nice neutralized image. There's no color, color casting over any of the buildings there. Everything looks like it's pretty neutral. It looks realistic to the scene. So I'm pretty happy there. So once I white balance, that is my first step. From there, and again, I'll use a different image for this one. Let's use this image here, and I'm going to reset it. So from here, I'm going to use this image, and I've got my white balance done, and I'm going to go now through the basic panel. So the basic panel starts with the tone sliders here. So my first thing, if I look up at my histogram, you can see where everything sort of makes movements when you use these tone panels. So first thing is exposure. And when I mouse over the exposure, you're going to see that it lights up the center part of the histogram here. This is your midtones. So this particular image you can see has a ton of midtones. So when I move this slider, you're going to see a pretty significant change. So what I'm doing when I slide my exposure is I'm looking to make sure that my midtones are as bright as they need to be in order to kind of bring out all of the information in those middle areas of my image. So for me, this looks pretty good. I usually bring it up slightly brighter than what I might expect so that I can go back in and I can bring down my highlights and kind of bring up my shadows around that. So next thing is contrast. So contrast is going to take your midtones and it's going to split them apart, meaning that anything that's bright, it's going to make brighter, and anything that's dark, it's going to make darker in your midtones, so that you're creating this sense of contrast around the middle, just the middle tones of your image. So if I slide my contrast this way, you'll see that everything gets a little bit like crisper in some ways, but it also kind of starts to muddy my darker areas. And I want to be really careful about that. I don't want crispy images. If I go the opposite direction with my contrast and I take contrast out, it really flattens my image. So be gentle with the contrast. I'm going to raise it just a little bit so that it creates a little bit of definition around my subject matter, but I'm not going to do too much. I'm going to go to about 15 here. From there, I'm going to do my highlights. My highlights, what I'm looking at for my highlights is like in these brighter areas here, I want to make sure that I get some detail in there. If I raise them up, you'll see that those highlight areas just become brighter, and I don't get any more detail in them. If I lower them, I start to bring back a little bit of the information that's in those highlight areas. So I'm going to bring this down to about here. My shadows, which are going to be right underneath here. This is kind of shadow area. This is a shadow area. I want to make sure that I have nice detail and that I can see everything in these areas, but I want to make sure that it's not overly bright so that there's nice contrast and a full range of tones in the image. So if I raise my shadows up, what you'll see is everything that's on the darker side of the image getting a little bit brighter. I'm looking particularly right now at this area here, where as I raise this up, you can see a lot more detail in there. If I lower it, you start to see that all of the detail in those darker areas just goes kind of mud. So for me, I'm trying to find that balance. So I'm going to raise them up a little bit so that I make sure I've got good sight and depth in my image. I'm going to leave it right about there. The last two things that you're going to do in the basic tone panel is you're going to set your black and white points. Now the black and white points, these are mathematical settings. So I'm going to turn these little knobs on the edge of my histogram. And what these things will show you is if your image goes out of gamut at all, meaning that those colors or tones are outside of the range of tones that are available. So when I do this, I'm not doing this based on an aesthetic decision. I'm not looking at it going, that looks good or looks bad. I'm doing this to make sure that I have my whites set on the very edge of this histogram and my darks set on the very edge of this histogram. So I've pulled my tones across the entire image and have a full range. So to do this, I'm going to hold down my Option key and I'm going to slide my whites up until I see all these whites that are coming in here. If I release the Option key, what you'll see is those are out of gamut. Everything that's red in there is out of gamut. That means it goes outside of the range of the histogram. So I'm going to hold that Option key back down and I'm going to slide until I see all of that white go away. So what I have left here, I'm going, and what I have left is this little tiny bit of white. Now, in the case of this image, that little tiny piece of white is a glint. It doesn't have detail in it. It's meant to sort of go into complete white. So I'm going to ignore that and just make sure that all the other tones around it, all the other whites are completely gone. For my blacks, I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to pull down on my blacks until I see black stuff coming in here. And you can see there's black around that grill and a little bit underneath that little hut. And so I'm going to pull this up until I just have a little bit of black left. I can have a little bit of black. It gives richness to the final image, but I don't want to have any large pieces of it, just little bits. So now I'm going to let that go. And you can see the blue right there, those are the things that are out of gamut. So I'm actually seeing that. I'm going to bring this up just a little bit more, and I'll leave that there. So that is working through the basic panel. This presence panel, I want you to stay away from for right now. They have really specific uses, and I don't want you using them until we talk through what those specific uses are. So for right now, I want you to work through your images by doing this develop module workflow.